Hi everyone, it's Brandy Kwong, Superintendent of Methuen Public Schools. I hope this finds you all well and healthy and enjoying your summer so far. We are certainly experiencing an unprecedented opening of school this year, and we have a lot of unanswered questions that I don't have all the answers to at this point, but our team is hard at work trying to make sure that we, with the safety as our priority, come up with 3 different models for the reopening of school based on the DESE guidelines. It's really important that we share some summary information with you right now so that you know where we are in our planning to be able to answer the questions below in the survey more accurately and be more informed to be able to answer those questions. So just a couple of things I want to just mention is that during this work, the most important thing for us is the health and safety of our students and staff. And so as we're going through looking at the models, this is our priority. We also know that students learn best in their school buildings when they're with their teachers and their peers. So we're really trying hard to figure out what is the best model for our students given the situation that we're in with the pandemic. Another one of our convictions is that we know that our families rely on schools for much more than teaching and learning. We know that we have hardworking families that need to be at work. We also know that the remote learning in the spring was very difficult for many families who needed childcare and weren't able to be home. So we want to recognize that while we're planning. The fourth thing that we are keeping in mind is that while these health restrictions, this pandemic is a public health crisis, not an educational crisis, but it has certainly forced our hand in changing what we do in education. And we must and we will refine our best practices to meet the students' academic, social, and emotional needs, no matter what we do. Student success is predicated on the adults around them working together. So our goal, and already we have been working as a team, teachers, staff, parents, school councils, we're working together to make sure that we're going to provide the best education for your child. And really that's the last number 6 there on that slide, is no matter what the learning model is, our priority is always going to be to provide a high quality education for your child. So there's a lot to keep in mind as we're going through our plans, but we're doing the best that we can with the information we have to make sure that we're providing all of those things through the planning process. So just a few highlights from the reopening guidelines from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. And these are bullets right from those guidelines, which you also have access to in a letter that I sent with this survey link. You can read that again in great detail, but here are some highlights: that they are requiring students in grades 2 through 12 to wear masks unless there are extenuating circumstances. And it's recommended for kindergarten and first grade. And of course, all of our plans include staff and student mask breaks. That students will remain in the same group of peers most of the day so that they won't be traveling to different classrooms in different areas of the building. So we're also planning for trying to keep that in mind while we're planning. That students and staff will practice frequent hand washing and use of hand sanitizer. So we are obviously planning for that and have plenty of soap and hand sanitizer in the buildings already. That desks in the classrooms will be arranged in rows facing the same direction, and at least, so a minimum of 3 feet apart. So where feasible, 6 feet is always better. But to plan for a full in-person, we are looking at 3 feet distance between students during the school day. Measures must be taken to reduce the number of students in hallways and other common spaces. So as we're planning and having these conversations, we're really considering where students are going to be during the day. Probably not eating in the cafeteria. They will be served, they will be eating in their classrooms. How are we going to have students travel between the bathroom and their classroom? Those are all things that we have embedded in our planning. And those are some of the highlights from the state's reopening guidelines that we have to consider as we're planning and that the state expects to see in our planning. So right now we're preparing for 3 different models. So the state has asked us to plan for a full in-person return. What does that look like? A hybrid model. What does a hybrid look like of some students all the time or some students some of the time, and then remote learning on the off times, and then a full remote learning. So they're asking us to plan and consider the details for each one of these models. And so at this time, I would like to introduce our Assistant Superintendent, Ron Noble, who's going to just summarize each of where we are right now in our planning stages with each of these models, and really what we're looking for from you to help us continue our planning. We will continue our planning over the next several weeks. There's a lot of details that go into this. So we need information from you that will help us plan and move forward in this process.
Thank you, Superintendent Kwong. So I'm going to just take a few minutes to talk through where we are with our planning related to each of the three models. So when it comes to in-person learning, some of the things that we're trying to wrap our heads around is the adequacy of classroom space and furniture. We know there are concerns for some buildings, and principals are working this week to identify space that could be repurposed as classrooms. We also are looking at inventorying the staffing needs for a safe return to full-time in-person learning. Obviously, if we're reducing the number of students that can safely fit in a classroom, there will be an impact on the number of staff members we need to be available for instruction for those smaller groups. We're also looking at each school and looking at whether they have clear protocols for arrival and dismissal that will work with all of the requirements and restrictions that have to be in place, so that we know students can travel safely to school, from school, and then can get where they need to get during the day safely as well. We are already in motion to make sure all schools are stocked with the supplies that they need for cleaning and hygiene practices. And so what you'll see in the survey that you're going to complete today, where we really need your feedback, is we really need a clear understanding of how many students, how many families intend to send their students back if full-time in-person learning is an option for us. Obviously, a lot hinges on the percentage of our total student body that will be comfortable returning full-time in person, and the percentage that is going to choose a remote option even if in-person schooling is available. The second scenario that we provided an overview of is the continuation of remote learning. We're in a different place entering the fall than we were in the spring, where the need to go full remote across the district came as a shock and surprise to everybody. Now we are able to plan. So as a result, we are assured that all students will have a device, either an iPad or a Chromebook. And then we've also got plans in motion to make sure that families that need reliable connectivity to the internet will be able to access that through the school district. Google Classroom is going to be used as our district-wide LMS, learning management system. And Clever will be used as our single sign-on. So we'll make sure that any issues that families experienced in the spring about knowing what content to access and how to get there, we'll have that piece streamlined quite a bit for them in the fall. And then as public health data permits, we are looking to identify a group of students that will attend full-time in person, even if we are in a remote learning scenario. So we're anticipating that group of students will include our sub-separate special education students, English learners, students who are homeless, and students who are in foster care. The survey results here are going to help us understand how many students will be able to participate fully in a remote learning scenario if we are sort of trying to follow a typical school day in a remote setting. Hybrid learning models is the third model, and this is where we absolutely need lots of community input. The reopening implementation team that met last week, a team of teachers and administrators, really kind of surfaced a variety of options for how other districts across the state and nation are thinking about hybrid learning, and have found promise in two. And it's those two that we're really looking for your feedback on through the survey. But basically, the hybrid model allows us to reduce the number of students that are physically present in a school building by having some students participate in their learning remotely each day. So the first option that we want your feedback on, and I know this may be difficult to read, but there is a link to this presentation in the survey, so you can dig in to that as well, is the alternating weeks model. So basically, as you can see in the graphic here, there's a cohort of students that that will be attending school 1 week, and then the following week they'll be remote, and the second cohort of students will be in person, and it sort of toggles back and forth like that. So there are some strengths that the team discussed last week, mainly around having that 5 consecutive instructional days, and folks feeling that that would allow for some deep in-person learning that really helps kids get the firm foundation in the content that they're trying to grasp. And then also supporting the provision of services for students who need them, and scheduling any assessments that those students might need as well, because they'll be physically in the building for 5 straight days every other week. We also have surfaced some weaknesses with this model, that the main one being that in an alternating week scenario, students will go 5 instructional days and 4 weekend days between being in person in their school. So that's 9 calendar days between in-person learning sessions. And so some folks have expressed concern about that being too long and leading to some disengagement on the part of students. I should have prefaced this all by saying, all of the options for hybrid learning are less than ideal, obviously less ideal than a full 5-day schedule, but we also are balancing the additional public health concerns that have to be factored in here. Option 2, we're calling the 2-3 model. And in this model, there are, again, 2 cohorts of students. One cohort would be in person Monday and Tuesday, remote Wednesday through Friday, while the second cohort would be remote Monday through Wednesday, and then in person Thursday and Friday. And so here, some of the key benefits are there are in-person touch points between teachers and students every single week, albeit for fewer days than obviously in the alternating weeks model. When you factor out across a 4-week span, for example, there are fewer in-person instructional days in this model than in the alternating weeks model, which is one of its key weaknesses. There are some key benefits to having regular opportunities for teachers to engage in person with their students every week. So really, we're looking to the community to help us understand which of these models make more sense to our families. The teams did discuss a couple of other hybrid models and ultimately ruled them out. The 2 being an AM/PM model where one cohort of students would attend school in the mornings and a second cohort would come in the afternoons. That was generally ruled out because of the likelihood of making for a pretty chaotic transition as the morning cohorts leaving the buildings and the afternoon cohorts arriving, and questions about how to properly clean and sanitize in between the 2 cohorts when they're both in the school on the same day. And then the alternating days model, which many folks may have seen other districts exploring, was also ruled out as being potentially too chaotic for families to sort of track whether they're an on day or an off day, because there's no consistency week to week. So what we were trying to strive for in the 2 models we're advancing is consistency for families looking at when their kids are participating in remote learning versus when they're participating in in-person learning in the schools. But we did want to share a couple of the other options that were considered. So as Superintendent Kwong said, and I'll reiterate here, your feedback is incredibly important to helping us advance our planning with your voices in mind. So we really hope that you will take a few minutes to complete our survey. Thank you.